The village of Nyama lay nestled between ancient forests and winding rivers, a place where the spirits of ancestors whispered through rustling leaves and the distant howls of unseen creatures. It was a land untouched by modern hands, where traditions were sacred, and the past spoke through the present. The villagers lived in harmony with nature, guided by the wisdom of their elders and the rituals passed down through generations. Every birth, every death, and every major event in the village was seen as a thread in the vast tapestry woven by the spirits. One fateful night, under a sky illuminated by a blood-red moon, a woman named Adia went into labor. Her cries echoed through the thatched roof huts, carried by the wind to the ears of the villagers who gathered outside her home, waiting for news. Inside, the midwives moved swiftly, their hands experienced and steady, whispering incantations to the ancestors for a safe delivery. Sweat beaded on Adia's forehead as she pushed, her husband, Jabari, kneeling beside her, whispering words of encouragement and prayer. Then, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath, a baby's cry pierced the night. The midwives gasped in relief, but their joy was short-lived. As they lifted the newborn to swaddle her in a soft cloth, their hands trembled. There, on the baby's tiny chest, was a mark, an intricate symbol, dark against her caramel skin. It was unlike any birthmark they had seen before, its swirling patterns reminiscent of the ancient carvings on the village's sacred stones. A silence fell over the room. The eldest midwife, Mama Lami, stepped closer, her face lined with age and wisdom. She traced the mark with a wrinkled finger, her lips parting slightly in recognition. The other women exchanged nervous glances, their eyes flickering with fear and reverence. One of them muttered a prayer under her breath, clutching the beads around her neck. Outside, the murmurs of the waiting villagers grew louder. When Jabari stepped out, holding his newborn daughter in his arms, the crowd leaned forward in anticipation. "She is healthy," he announced, his voice strong yet laced with uncertainty. The moment the torchlight illuminated the child's mark, gasps rippled through the gathered people. An old man stumbled backward, making the sign of protection. A young mother pulled her child closer to her chest. "The mark of the ancients," someone whispered. "She is cursed," another voice murmured, fearful. Adia, still weak from childbirth, cradled her daughter tightly as she was brought outside. Her heart pounded in her chest as she met the eyes of the elders. "She is my child," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Jabari, a warrior known for his courage, clenched his jaw. "No harm will come to her," he vowed, his protective instincts burning brighter than the torches around them. But deep inside he too wondered, what did this mark mean? And what destiny had just been born into their village? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the village of Nyama buzzed with hushed conversations. Word of the newborn with the sacred mark had spread like wildfire, igniting both curiosity and fear. The elders, who held the wisdom of generations, gathered in the center of the village beneath the great baobab, the tree that had stood for centuries, witnessing the passage of time. They knew this mark was no ordinary birthmark, it was a sign, a message from the spirits. Among them sat Baba Omari, the oldest and wisest of the elders. His frail body bore the weight of over 90 seasons, yet his mind remained sharp. He had seen many things but nothing quite like this in his lifetime. He cleared his throat and the murmuring crowd fell silent. With a voice that commanded respect he spoke. "There is an old prophecy," he began, his tone slow and deliberate, "one that has not been spoken of for many generations." The villagers leaned in eager to hear. The flames of the communal fire flickered, casting eerie shadows as Baba Omari continued. "Long ago, when the world was still young and the spirits of our ancestors walked freely among us, a child was born with a mark just like the one on this girl. It was said that such a child would be touched by the spirit realm, destined to bring great change to our people. But whether that change would be a blessing or a curse, no one could say." A hush fell over the gathering as the weight of his words settled upon them. Then, from among the elders, an old woman spoke. Her name was Mama Abani, and she was the keeper of the village's oral history. She shifted slightly, adjusting the beads around her neck before continuing the tale. "The last child born with the mark lived many moons ago. He grew into a man of great power, able to command the elements, to see beyond the veil of the living and the dead." She paused, her eyes scanning the villagers. "But he was also feared. Some believed he had the power to protect the village, while others thought he would bring destruction. When a great drought struck, many accused him of angering the spirits. Some say he left the village willingly, others claim he was banished. Regardless, he was never seen again." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of history bore heavily upon them, and fear crept into their hearts. "We must consult the shaman," a voice finally spoke. All eyes turned toward Jabari, the father of the marked child. He stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "We cannot let fear decide our path. The spirits have spoken through this child and we must understand their message." That evening, under a sky thick with stars, the village shaman, Nanda, was summoned. She was a woman of mystery, living on the outskirts of Nyama, where the forest met the river. Her connection to the spirit world was unquestioned, and her visions had guided the village through many trials. As the villagers gathered in a tight circle, Nanda stepped forward, her staff adorned with bones and feathers clinking softly. She examined the child, running her fingers gently over the mark. Closing her eyes, she began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. The villagers watched, some mesmerized, others shifting uncomfortably. After what felt like an eternity, Nanda opened her eyes. "This child," she said, her voice carrying a weight beyond this world, "is neither a curse nor a blessing. She is a bridge." The words sent ripples through the crowd. "A bridge? Between what?" "The spirits have chosen her to walk between realms," Nanda continued. "She will see what others cannot, hear what others ignore. She has the power to bring balance or chaos. It is the choices she makes and the way we guide her that will decide her fate." A murmur spread through the crowd, some nodding in acceptance, others shaking their heads in doubt. "This is madness," a man exclaimed. "What if she is like the last one? What if she brings suffering upon us? Or what if she saves us?" Mama Abani countered, her voice calm but firm. "What if this time we do not reject what we do not understand?" Jabari and Adia, standing together, looked down at their daughter. The mark on her chest seemed to glow in the firelight, a symbol of a future yet to be written. The village was divided. Some whispered that she was chosen by the gods, while others feared she would bring calamity. But one thing was certain, the child was no ordinary girl, and her presence would forever alter the fate of Nyama. From the moment she could walk, Zola, the girl with the mark, felt the weight of eyes upon her. In the village of Nyama she was both revered and feared, a child of whispers and wary glances. Some villagers called her a blessing, a living connection to the spirit world, while others saw her as a harbinger of misfortune. Even among children her own age, she was an outsider, someone to be admired from a distance but never truly embraced. When she was 5, she learned what it meant to be different. A group of children played by the riverbank, their laughter ringing through the air as they chased each other across the smooth stones. Zola watched longingly, her small hands twisting in the fabric of her tunic. She had always been told to be careful, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But that day she stepped forward, eager to join the game. The laughter died. The children hesitated, their gazes flickering to the mark on her chest, which peeked from beneath her clothing. One boy, Kwame, hesitated before nodding. "You can play," he said, but his voice held uncertainty. Zola grinned and ran with them, her feet light against the stones. For a moment she felt normal. Then, as she dodged an outstretched hand, she stumbled. Her palms scraped against the earth, and pain flared in her skin. But something else happened, something that made the children freeze in place. The wound on her palm sealed itself before their very eyes. A girl screamed. Another boy stumbled backward, making the sign of protection. "She is not like us," one child whispered, and just like that, the moment of acceptance shattered. The children ran, leaving Zola standing alone by the river, staring at her unmarked palm. From that day forward, the gap between her and the other children widened. As she grew, the stories about her abilities spread. Some swore they had seen her talking to birds, that the wind moved when she whispered to it. Others claimed she could see things that were not there, that her eyes would sometimes go distant, as if she were listening to voices no one else could hear. Even the elders began to watch her more closely, their expressions unreadable. Her mother, Adia, tried to shield her from the villagers' judgment. "You are special, my child," she would whisper, brushing Zola's hair from her face. "One day they will understand." But her father, Jabari, remained wary. He loved his daughter fiercely, but he knew the way fear could turn people cruel. He had seen it before. When Zola was 10, an elder named Kofi fell ill. His body burned with fever, his breathing labored. The villagers gathered outside his hut, fearing the worst. Zola, drawn by something she could not explain, stepped forward. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his forehead. A shudder ran through her body. In her mind's eye, she saw something, shadowy figures standing at the edge of the village, whispering in a language she did not know. A feeling of deep sorrow washed over her, and then just as suddenly it was gone. Kofi's fever broke that night. The villagers called it a miracle. She is a healer, some whispered. She is dangerous, others muttered. The division among them grew. Some sought her out, hoping for blessings or visions of their futures. Others refused to look her in the eye, fearing she was something unnatural. Even the elders debated among themselves. Could she be controlled? Should she be feared? By 12, Zola had learned to live with the stares, the whispers, the uncertainty in people's eyes. She spent more time alone, wandering the edges of the village, listening to the wind in the trees, speaking softly to the creatures of the forest. And though she tried to ignore it, she knew one thing for certain. Her journey was only just beginning. The dry season arrived earlier than expected, and with it came a string of misfortunes that sent whispers of fear rippling through the village of Nyama. The once abundant river began to shrink, its waters retreating as if recoiling from an unseen force. Crops that had once flourished under the sun wilted before their time, their leaves curling into brittle husks. Livestock vanished without a trace, strong, healthy goats disappearing overnight, their prints leading nowhere. The nights grew eerily silent, save for the occasional cries of unseen creatures deep within the forest. The villagers, already wary from past omens, grew restless. The spirits are angry, muttered old men by the communal fire. Something unnatural lingers in our village, murmured the women as they pounded maize into flour. All eyes turned to Zola. She had always been different, everyone knew that. And now, as their suffering deepened, the old fears resurfaced. People began to recall every strange occurrence that had followed her since birth. She heals wounds without herbs, one woman whispered, gripping the amulets around her neck. She speaks to birds and they listen, another added. She sees things we cannot. At first, Zola ignored the murmurs. She had long since grown accustomed to the fearful glances, the cautious distance people kept from her. But soon the whispers turned into accusations. One afternoon, a woman named Sefu stormed into the village square, her face contorted in anger. "My son is sick," she cried, holding the frail boy in her arms. His body was drenched in sweat, his breathing shallow. He was well yesterday and now he burns with fever. It is her. It is the girl with the mark, she brings curses upon us. Zola, who had been fetching water from the well, froze as all eyes turned to her. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I have done nothing," she said, her voice steady but strained. Sefu's face twisted with rage. "Nothing? Then why does darkness follow you? The drought, the missing animals, the strange shadows in the trees. Ever since you were born, misfortune clings to us like a disease." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some nodded, their fear giving way to anger. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to condemn a child without proof. But the tension was undeniable. That evening, the village elders gathered under the great baobab to discuss Zola's fate. The council consisted of the wisest and oldest among them, those who had seen the rise and fall of many seasons. Baba Omari sat at the center, his face unreadable. The villagers assembled around them, eager to hear their decision. "She is still a child," Mama Abani argued, her voice carrying through the night air. "She has harmed no one. How can we turn against our own when we do not even understand what is happening?" "But what if we are too late?" countered Elder Yao, a man who had always been wary of things he could not explain. "What if she is the reason the spirits are punishing us? Are we to wait until disaster strikes us all?" A man from the crowd stepped forward. "And if we cast her out, will that not bring even greater misfortune?" His voice was Jabari's, Zola's father. His stance was firm, his gaze defiant. "She is my daughter. I will not let fear make monsters of us." Sefu scoffed. "You would risk the entire village for her?" "She is not a danger," Jabari insisted. "We have no proof." "The spirits have given us plenty of signs," another villager argued. The debate raged on with no clear resolution. Some called for her exile, others demanded patience. Even Baba Omari, who had always been the voice of wisdom, remained silent for a long time before finally speaking. "The spirits do not act without reason," he said slowly. "This girl was born among us, marked by forces we do not fully understand. Casting her out may bring relief, or it may bring ruin." He turned his gaze toward Zola, who stood near her mother, watching everything unfold with wide eyes. "I will not make this decision lightly." The council agreed to wait, but not without conditions. Zola would be watched closely. If more misfortunes befell the village, if more omens appeared, then action would be taken. The people were unsatisfied, but they obeyed their elders. As the crowd dispersed, Zola clenched her fists, her heart heavy. She had spent her entire life trying to prove she was not a curse, and yet, it had never been enough. The fear in their eyes told her one thing: whether she willed it or not, her fate was no longer entirely her own. The night before she left, Zola sat outside her family's hut, staring up at the vast sky. The stars shimmered like scattered embers, their distant glow filling her with both wonder and sorrow. She had spent her entire life in the village of Nyama, yet it had never truly felt like home. Fear had built invisible walls around her, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not break through them. Now the village elders had decided, they would watch her, test her, judge her. And if misfortune continued, they would cast her out. But Zola refused to wait for their verdict. She needed answers. At dawn, she left with nothing but a satchel of dried food, a water skin, and the clothes on her back. Her mother wept as she embraced her, whispering prayers into her ear. Her father's grip was strong, his silence heavier than words. "Find the truth," he finally said, "and come back stronger." She turned and walked away, leaving the only world she had ever known behind: the wilderness and the nomads. The first few days were grueling. The dense jungle was alive with unseen creatures. Eyes glowed in the darkness, rustling leaves hinted at predators lurking nearby. But Zola was not afraid. The forest spoke to her in ways she could not explain. Birds would cry warnings when danger was near, and the wind would shift when she needed to change direction. On the third day she stumbled upon a group of nomads, travelers who lived between the rivers and mountains, never staying in one place for too long. Their leader, an elderly woman named Sada, recognized the mark on Zola's chest the moment she saw her. "You carry the sign of the guardian," Sada said, beckoning her closer. "It is an ancient symbol, older than any kingdom, older than the villages of men." Zola's heart pounded. "You know what it means?" Sada nodded and invited her to sit by the fire. The nomads gathered around, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "Long ago," Sada began, "there were those chosen by the spirits to stand between this world and the unseen. They were not warriors nor were they gods, but something in between. They were guardians." Zola listened intently as Sada told her of people marked like her, individuals who could sense the presence of spirits, heal with their touch, and protect their people from forces beyond understanding. But over time, the villages had forgotten them, turning their gifts into curses, their wisdom into myths. "Many feared what they could not understand," Sada said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Some were exiled. Others were hunted. And so, the guardians disappeared, until now." Zola's fingers brushed against her mark. "So, I am one of them?" "You are the first in generations," Sada confirmed. "But you do not yet understand your purpose." The hidden temple. Sada instructed Zola to seek out the Temple of Echoes, a place hidden deep within the jungle, said to hold the truth of the guardians. It was a dangerous journey, but Zola knew she had to go. Days turned into weeks as she ventured further than she had ever dared. The jungle tested her. Storms raged, rivers swelled, and hunger gnawed at her belly. Yet each time she faltered, the world around her seemed to guide her forward. A broken branch pointed the way, the distant call of a bird led her toward shelter. She was not alone, even when no one was beside her. Then one evening she found it. The Temple of Echoes stood half buried in the roots of ancient trees, its stone walls covered in carvings that mirrored the mark on her chest. Vines draped over its entrance as if the jungle itself was trying to keep it hidden. With a deep breath, Zola stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of earth and time. Strange symbols lined the walls, glowing faintly as if whispering their secrets. At the center of the temple stood a pedestal, atop which rested an old, weathered stone tablet. As Zola touched the tablet, a rush of warmth surged through her body. Visions flooded her mind, images of guardians before her, men and women standing at the edge of villages, their hands raised as unseen forces swirled around them. She saw spirits, some kind, others twisted in anger, hovering at the borders of the human world. And then a voice. "You are the bridge." Zola gasped, stumbling backward. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was something beyond her understanding. "You have been chosen to protect, not to destroy. To balance, not to conquer. Your power is not a curse, child, it is a gift." Tears burned in Zola's eyes as understanding crashed over her. She had spent her entire life believing she was an outcast, a mistake. But she was meant for something greater. The return. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Zola made her way back to Nyama. The journey home was different. She moved with purpose, her fear replaced by certainty. She now understood that the misfortunes that had struck the village were not caused by her but by something else, an imbalance in the spiritual world, something her people had ignored for too long. When she arrived at the village gates, the people stared in shock. She had been gone for months, and many had assumed she would never return. But there she stood, taller, stronger, her presence commanding their attention. "I know what I am," she announced, her voice steady. "And I know why the spirits are angry." The elders gathered, and Zola told them everything, about the guardians, the spirits, and the delicate balance that had been disrupted. She explained that her presence was not a punishment but a warning, a call to restore what had been forgotten. Some villagers still looked at her with fear, but others saw something new in her, a sense of certainty, of purpose. Even those who had doubted her before could not deny the power in her words. Baba Omari studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Then tell us, guardian," he said, "how do we make things right?" Zola took a deep breath. The journey was far from over. There was much to do, much to teach. But for the first time in her life she was not alone. She had a purpose. And she would protect her people, whether they feared her or not. Zola stood at the edge of Nyama, her heart pounding like the steady beat of a drum. The village looked the same huts, the same familiar faces, but she knew everything had changed. She had changed. The weight of her journey, the revelations of her past, and the truth of her purpose pressed upon her like a cloak woven from the whispers of spirits. Her return had not gone unnoticed. The villagers gathered in clusters, whispering among themselves. Some were shocked. Many had believed she would never return. Others were wary, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Even now, despite all she had learned, the fear remained. Then from the crowd, her father stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and steady, told her what she needed to know. He believed in her. "Zola," Baba Omari's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. The elder's face was carved with years of wisdom, his gaze sharp as he studied her. "You have returned." "I have," she said firmly. "And I bring knowledge with me." She told them everything, of the guardians, the spirits, the balance that had been disturbed. She spoke of the temple hidden deep in the jungle, of the nomads who still remembered the old ways, of the truth behind her mark. "I am not a curse," she declared. "I was born to protect this village, to restore what was lost." Some villagers listened, their eyes wide with wonder. Others crossed their arms, unwilling to let go of their doubt. Then Elder Yao stepped forward, his voice lined with skepticism. "Words are wind, child. You left a girl, you return claiming to be something more. But why should we believe you?" Zola clenched her fists, expecting the resistance. She had not come back to be accepted with open arms, she had come back to prove herself. "What must I do?" she asked. The elders conferred among themselves before Baba Omari turned back to her. "A trial," he declared. "If you claim to be a guardian, then you must prove your worth. You will face a challenge set by the spirits themselves." A ripple of anticipation spread through the crowd. Some nodded in approval, others smirked, eager to see her fail. The trial. The challenge was chosen. A journey to the sacred spring, a place where the waters had once healed the sick and ensured bountiful harvests. But for months, the spring had been dry, its power seemingly lost. If Zola was truly a guardian, then she would restore it. At sunrise, the entire village gathered as Zola made her way toward the spring. The path wound through thick jungle, the air dense with humidity. Elders, warriors, and even children followed at a distance, waiting to see what would happen. As she approached the dried-up spring, a heavy stillness settled over the clearing. The earth was cracked, the riverbed empty. It was a place that once thrived with life, but now it lay barren, abandoned by the spirits. Zola knelt before the dry earth, pressing her hands to the ground. She closed her eyes, letting the energy of the land seep into her, listening to the whispers beneath the soil. She could feel it, the pulse of something ancient, something that had been silenced but not lost. Then she heard it. A low, rumbling voice, deep and distant. "Prove you are worthy." A gust of wind howled through the clearing, carrying with it a shadow, a swirling mass of darkness, shifting and writhing as if alive. The villagers gasped as it rose from the trees, a force unlike anything they had seen before. Zola stood, her breath steady. This was her true test. The shadow lunged. She raised her hands, and for the first time she embraced what she was. The energy within her, the power she had always feared, surged through her veins like fire. The wind responded to her call, rushing forward in a powerful gust. The earth trembled beneath her feet. With a cry, she thrust her hands forward. The air cracked with energy as light erupted from her palms, striking the darkness. The shadow howled, twisting in agony before vanishing into the sky like smoke in the wind. The villagers stared in stunned silence. And then water. A deep rumble echoed through the earth as the ground beneath the spring cracked open. A thin stream of liquid emerged, then another and another, until a rush of crystal-clear water poured forth, filling the empty basin. The dry land drank eagerly, the river coming to life before their eyes. The air filled with the scent of renewal, of earth and rain. Gasps and shouts of wonder filled the clearing. She has done it. The spring is alive again. She truly is a guardian. Zola turned, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The fear in the villagers' eyes had been replaced with something new, something she had never seen before. Faith. Elder Yao stepped forward, his skepticism now replaced with awe. He knelt before her, pressing his forehead to the ground. "Forgive us," he murmured. "We were blind to the truth." Baba Omari approached, his eyes gleaming with pride. "You have proven yourself, Zola," he said. "You are not a curse. You are our guardian." Her parents rushed to embrace her, their tears warm against her skin. For the first time in her life, Zola was no longer an outcast. She was no longer feared. She was home. And she was ready to protect it. Years had passed since Zola had first been marked by the spirits, and the village of Nyama had flourished under her guidance. Her name had become synonymous with the balance between the natural world and the unseen spirits that guided it. The legacy she left behind was one of peace, prosperity, and unity, a legacy that had shaped not only the present but the future of her people. Yet, as the seasons turned and the years unfurled, the winds of prophecy began to stir once more. It was during a quiet afternoon, as the village rested in the heat of a long summer, that a new child was born into Nyama. The birth was not unlike any other. The cries of the infant echoed through the huts, and the women of the village sang their songs of welcome. But as the child was held up to the light, the villagers saw it, a small, delicate mark no larger than a finger's width, appearing on the infant's chest. The mark was unmistakable. It was the same symbol Zola had borne as a child, the ancient glyph that had once caused fear, then wonder and finally reverence. It was a sign that the cycle had begun anew. As word spread through the village, the elders gathered once again, this time with furrowed brows and quiet murmurs. Baba Omari, who had seen the full arc of Zola's rise from outcast to leader, was the first to speak. "The spirits are not finished with us," he said, his voice tinged with awe and uncertainty. "A new child, a new mark, perhaps it is a sign that something greater is coming." Zola herself, now a woman in her prime and still the village's spiritual guide, was not surprised. She had felt a stirring in the air in the days leading up to the birth, a subtle shift in the energy that had filled her with both anticipation and caution. The spirits had never truly revealed their full plan to her, and though she had walked the path they set before her, she knew that their designs were far from finished. "This child is not a threat," Zola said, her voice calm and steady as she addressed the elders and the gathered villagers. "The mark is not an omen of disaster, but a continuation of the cycle. Just as I was called to protect, so too will this child have a role to play. It is not yet clear what that role is, but we will watch and guide this child as we did for me." But not all were as certain as Zola. Some of the villagers, particularly the older ones who had lived through the turmoil of the past, were fearful. They had seen the destruction that had come before the mark had been embraced. They had witnessed the divisions that had torn the village apart. For them, the return of the mark was not a symbol of hope, but a harbinger of something unknown. "We cannot let this happen again," one elder, who had been a witness to the chaos Zola had once faced, murmured. "We must be cautious. What if the mark brings more pain than peace?" Zola listened but did not respond with fear. She had learned that fear only clouds the judgment. Instead, she took a deep breath and turned to the child, the new bearer of the mark. The infant was small, its eyes closed in sleep, unaware of the weight it now carried. Yet Zola could feel the connection. This child was part of a larger story, one that was not yet finished. The mark was not the end but a new beginning. "We do not know what will come," Zola said softly, kneeling down beside the infant. "But we will be ready. We will teach this child the lessons we have learned, and we will trust in the spirits to show us the way." The village watched in silence as Zola's words settled over them. The skepticism and fear still lingered, but in that moment, they understood something important, that the mark was not a burden but a blessing in disguise. It was a reminder that life itself was cyclical, and that everything, good or bad, was part of a greater balance. Over the following months, Zola and the elders took it upon themselves to watch over the new child, raising it with the wisdom they had gained from their experiences. The village grew quiet with anticipation, but also with hope. They understood now that the mark did not come to disrupt their peace. It came to challenge them, to remind them of their connection to the spirits and to the earth. As the child grew, signs of its potential began to manifest in subtle ways. The infant's eyes sparkled with an unusual clarity, as if it could perceive things others could not. Animals seemed to gravitate toward it, responding to its presence with an unusual calmness. The child would occasionally cry out at night, as though speaking to the spirits in a language the villagers could not understand. Zola, watching with a knowing eye, recognized these signs as the same ones she had felt as a young girl. The child was beginning to awaken to its calling. It was not long before the child began to show its own unique gifts. When the village suffered from a strange illness that swept through the children, it was the mark-bearer who, despite its youth, was able to calm the fevered children with a simple touch, soothing them with a presence that defied explanation. The villagers marveled at the infant's growing abilities, some calling it a miracle, while others remained wary, unsure of what this new power meant. But Zola, watching quietly, understood that the child was not merely repeating her journey, it was carving its own path, guided by the spirits just as she had been. The mark was not a curse to be feared, but a legacy of protection, of balance, and of renewal. As the years passed, the child grew in strength and wisdom, just as Zola had before it. The elders taught the child the sacred ways of the village, and Zola herself began to prepare it for the trials that lay ahead. It was clear now that the mark was not just a symbol for one person. It was part of an ongoing cycle, a cycle of rebirth and growth, where each generation would learn from the past while stepping boldly into the future. And so, the cycle of prophecy continued, leaving the village in a state of quiet expectation. The spirits, it seemed, were never truly silent. They whispered through the winds, through the rivers, and through the hearts of the marked. What the future held was still unknown, but Zola, now an elder herself, was no longer afraid. She had seen the truth of the Spirit's plan, that life, like the seasons, was forever in flux, forever changing, but always returning to the balance that held the world together. The mark, it seemed, would never cease to be a mystery. But perhaps that was its true purpose, to remind the people of Nyama that they were all part of a larger story, one that stretched across time, carried on by the marked children from generation to generation.